Chapter 11. The long ride to El Paso offered Anna the rest she sorely needed, a reprieve from her battles, both physical and bureaucratic. She and Lisa rode alone in the high-speed transport car as it raced across Texas, hovering meters above the ground. The full trip took around 7 hours, and Lisa slept most of the way. Anna had occupied her time trying to still her mind, staring out the window at the farm factories and broken terrain. The history books, which Daniel discussed frequently, pictured Texas as a near paradise of cattle, wheat, rice, and cotton. Livestock was raised in open fields, cows grazing on healthy green grass with tails whipping at flies in the sunlight. Her observations didn't match this idyllic scene. Metal buildings and pens of animals huddled close together dotted the landscape, and while a few fields of rice or wheat sometimes appeared, most of what she saw had nothing growing on it at all. The transport arrived in El Paso as the twilight sun dipped below the horizon, creating a beautiful painting for her first view of the city. Its vista looked like a miniature version of Houston, an oasis of life in a sea of industry. The towers themselves didn't quite match the heights of Houston's skyscrapers, but they were on their way. Anna recalled that the Jacobs had owned a ranch outside the city limits only a decade ago. Corporate encroachment was a more recent phenomenon here than in Houston, where private land ownership hadn't existed in its rural areas for at least 20 years. As she and Lisa exited the transport, they were greeted by the 2 detectives from the Shannon Jacobs interview. Anna recognized Evans, young and dark-skinned, with a face that naturally formed into a smile. But this was her first time seeing Reynolds, though his low drawl was familiar. The gray-flecked stubble on his chin and age lines around tired eyes declared 2 months from retirement. But she guessed he'd been working this vibe for at least the last decade or so. Both detectives dressed professionally and comfortably. Reynolds had on an old-fashioned brown suit, making him a caricature from a crime thriller vid, and Evans wore a collared shirt and pressed pants, the image of a brainy, youthful upstart. They sported police batons at their waists, MMDs that would be configured to El Paso law enforcement regulations. Reynolds greeted them. "Welcome to El Paso, agents. I'm Detective Reynolds, and this is my partner, Detective Evans." Anna extended her hand. "Pleased to meet you. I'm Agent Flynn. My partner is Agent Williams." They exchanged handshakes, and Anna and Lisa picked up their bags to follow the detectives. "We have an AI named Simon." Simon's voice projected from her data lens. "Hello, detectives." Evans smiled. "Hello, Simon. We also have an AI. We call him Max." "Greetings." Max's tone was in a register a hair higher than Simon's, good for keeping the 2 distinct. Reynolds shook his head. "Well, aren't we quite the party now? Let's get going. First stop is to settle y'all in your hotel." Lisa tilted her head. "And then dinner?" "Of course. We'll drum up something good for you." Evans gestured in the general direction of the city. "Just let us know what you're into. We have a wide selection here, and John and I are your guides tonight." They arrived at a bus, and Reynolds punched in the information for their destination. Anna felt her weight shift as the vehicle lifted into the air and started moving. She decided now was as good a time as any to start discussing the case. "We watched the vid of your interview with Mrs. Jacobs." "Ah," Reynolds gave a slight shrug. "Not much came from that. We got more out of the search after. I assume you've reviewed our reports?" "We have. Jacobs had a clear fixation on Councilwoman Shaw." Evans agreed. "It all makes sense. Feeney took their home a few years back, and then earlier this year Mrs. Jacobs lost her job. He got angry, started looking for someone to blame, and found Shaw." "He did." Anna paused. "Isn't it an odd fixation, though? Several hundred miles away and over something that happened years ago. I imagine there are much closer targets that could have been the focus for his anger." Reynolds placed his hands on his hips. In my experience, which I'd like to think is considerable, there's no sense in these things. People find someone or something to be mad at and pile stuff up on it. I guess he felt sorry for himself, searched for info about how they lost their property, and settled on Shaw. Once he had a target, well, that was that. I see. Anna would be inclined to agree if she hadn't seen the sheep vid, but Jacobs hadn't just snapped on his own. Also, Reynolds' theory didn't account for Zhao. Evans started talking again, more animated than her partner. The thing is, Councilwoman Shaw was the foreign element here. We like our small city, and Shaw is the outsider who came in and messed things up for a lot of people, so it makes sense she drew Ben's ire. It does make sense. Anna changed direction. What do you two know about the organization called A Better Way? Uh-oh. A mocking smile crossed Reynolds' lips, adding creases to his already lined face. You've unleashed the flood now. Evans lit up. I love it. I've been going to the meetings for almost 8 months now, and I really think they're going to be a positive force in our country. Anna lifted her eyebrows in surprise and studied the detective. Oh? Yes, it's been a breath of fresh air for me. This job can be a bit of a downer, always seeing the worst of people. I've been doing this for years now and have witnessed so many different ways people hurt one another. But A Better Way has a more optimistic outlook. They believe there are real changes we can make if we just get people together. She paused and frowned. But why do you ask? Anna shot Lisa a wary glance. They'd need to take care when talking about A Better Way with Detective Evans. We have some evidence that Ben Jacobs and the woman he was with were both involved with them. A touch of defensiveness entered Evans' tone. We didn't find anything about that, and I don't see how it would matter, unless you think A Better Way is something it's not. She narrowed her eyes. Anna recalled their conversation with Garrett and realized their discussion had focused on A Better Way's growth and potential threat. They hadn't spent any time understanding their ideology. We're still learning about A Better Way. You might be a good source to tell us more. Evans sighed. There are so many groups out there who want to tear down the government, who feel oppressed somehow because our country isn't a democracy like before. But we aren't like that. We do believe there are problems and inequalities, but also that reform is possible through the current structure. President Strickland's administration has been very empowering, and she listens to the populace. If enough people clamor for changes, she'll make them. So we bring people together. It's not about violence. Reynolds spread out his palms. See what I mean? This one talks to me about this stuff all the time. I can give you a rundown of every talking point, and I've never even been to a meetup before. Lisa laughed. I believe it, and I know what it's like to work with an idealistic partner. Anna rolled her eyes. Hey now, that's not fair. Yeah, Anna's one of those find the good in everyone types. At least she is until they upset her. Anna leaned over and nudged her. I see the good in you. And for that, I am forever grateful. The bus began to slow, and they pulled into the docking station of a mid-grade hotel called Overnight Express, the kind of place that would do, and Anna had no problem with that. Reynolds stepped out and turned to face them. Well, we can talk about all this later, but I think you'd best be getting your stuff up to your rooms. When you've finished, come on back down here and we'll scrounge up some food. Nothing fancy, but we'll get you full. Lisa brightened. Sounds perfect to me. The detectives waited in the lobby while Anna and Lisa checked in and deposited their bags. They were each assigned a private room, comfortable enough, but nothing extravagant, as the name implied. After unpacking, Anna made her way back to the elevator entrance, where she found Lisa waiting for her. Lisa placed her back against the wall of the hallway, arms crossed. What do you think? Anna considered the question. I think they believe they've solved this already, and that might make it harder to drill into A Better Way. If they knew about the vid, it might be easier, but no way I'm letting that tidbit drop in front of Detective Evans. She's quite the enthusiastic one. Definitely won't be objective regarding a better way, but I doubt she's the violent type. No, I'd guess the terrorist and propaganda wings are kept very separate from one another. But it makes me think I'd like to better understand how they sell themselves. What is it they tell people that excites them so much? The elevator dinged its arrival, and Lisa patted her stomach. Well, for now, I'm putting it all out of my mind. I'm ready for some food.
Daniel waited nervously before Marcus's apartment door with Jason standing next to him. Tonight's meetup wouldn't be a gathering of terrorists. It would be full of ordinary people seeking something positive. But it was the front line of something dangerous, and he'd be there watching, taking it in. The door thinned and then disappeared to reveal Abigail wearing a thin coat layered over a casual dress. She flung her hands out and moved forward to greet them. "Daniel!" Her embrace was light and loose, and after only a moment she drew back to look at Jason. "Wow, now you've gotten tall." "That's what they tell me." Jason performed an awkward half bow. She laughed and then turned to invite them inside. "Come on in and meet everyone." They entered the apartment to find Abigail's son, Jackson, sitting in the middle of the floor beside a matter vid, enthralled by the animated characters as they moved about a small stage that shifted with the story. This type of MMD was a more recent invention. Such devices didn't exist when Jason was a toddler. Daniel had been following the tech over the past year and started experimenting with his own models a few months ago. The most difficult part was creating realistic movements of animals and humans, and Daniel found the toy quite impressive. The bright colors and silly voices obscured its complex nature. A gray-haired woman sat in a chair watching over Jackson and his entertainment with a broad smile. Daniel recognized her as Marcus's mother, though she'd aged in the decades since he'd last visited her over a Christmas break in college. "Hey, you two." Marcus greeted them enthusiastically as he came up from somewhere at the back of the apartment. Carrying a jacket over his left arm, he put out his right hand for Daniel to shake. "Good to see you. It's been a while." It certainly has. Daniel accepted the hand and pumped it firmly. Marcus motioned to his mother. "I invited my mom to make sure no one burns down the apartment." Jason bristled with false defensiveness. "That only happened once." Daniel shot his son a side-eye at the joke, but Marcus's mother wasn't fazed. "Jason, you can call me Mrs. Edwards, and I assure you, you will not be burning down this apartment." Abigail crouched down by Jackson and pulled him into her. He spun to face her, matter vid forgotten, and flung his arms around her in a massive hug. "Mommy!" "Jack!" She matched his intensity, face beaming. Marcus bent over and pointed to Jason. "This is Jason. He's going to stay with you tonight while Mommy and I go out." "Out?" Jackson's expression was a cross between unhappiness and confusion. Abigail, undeterred, kept up the positive energy. "Yes, Daddy and I are going out, but don't worry, sweetie. You'll hardly know we're gone." Daniel turned to Jason. "Do you want to show Jackson your comic?" "Oh, yeah." Jason swung his backpack around and opened the zipper. He pulled out a thin book and joined Abigail and Jackson on the floor. "I've got one you'll love." For his part, Jackson wasn't ready to be invested in the idea yet, at least not with Abigail still within reach. Daniel hoped that would change after they left. After a few more pleasantries and settling everyone, Daniel trailed Marcus and Abigail out of the apartment toward the building's transport dock. "Jackson looks great. Is he making the transition well?" Abigail offered him a tired smile. "I think so. Truth be told, it seems to have been harder on him than me." Marcus grinned. "She only says that because she's not here for the meltdowns." Her lips drew into a small pout and he nudged her affably. "Nah, I'm only kidding. He's been a total trooper. But you getting home is always the best part of his day. You can see it in his eyes." "It's the best part of my day, too. But I must say, it's nice to be out with you." She pecked Marcus on the cheek, then turned to Daniel. "I've been going to these meetups for the past few months, but I haven't been able to convince Marcus to come with me. I've been talking his ear off, but it's not the same as experiencing it in person." Daniel smiled. "I'm looking forward to it myself." A half hour later, Abigail led them into a hotel, an upscale place in Midtown. They walked into the lobby, a large, plush room with red carpet and shiny bronze fixtures. An elderly man with a kind face greeted them as they crossed the threshold. Welcome to the Majestic. How may I assist you? Abigail spoke for the group. We're here for a better way. Of course. If you take the hallway to the left, you'll come to the conference rooms. They're in the third one. Abigail thanked him, and they made their way forward, following his directions. As they approached the room, Abigail turned to face them, still walking. Make sure you enable name tags. Daniel did so, and his data lens placed the names Abigail and Marcus across the bodies of his companions. They found the meetup in a cozy room currently partitioned to handle 30 people or so. A podium stood in front next to a table with a glass of water, and 5 rows of chairs sat facing it. People milled about in small clusters, filling the room with a gentle buzz of conversation. A brunette woman in a white professional-styled suit glanced up from a group of 4 and noticed Abigail. She excused herself and moved to welcome the trio. Charlotte! Abigail met her friend with a hug. Abigail! Do I finally get to meet your husband? Yes! Abigail pulled back and turned toward Marcus. This is the man himself. Marcus reached out his hand, and Charlotte took it in both of hers. And this is Daniel. He and Marcus are old college buddies. Marcus invited him to join us. Daniel chuckled. The third wheel for the evening, I'm afraid. Missing my better half. She's traveling for work. Charlotte nodded sympathetically. I understand. My wife is out of town too, visiting her folks. She's usually at these things, so it's on me to take good notes. Abigail spread out her hands. Sit with us, then. I'd love to. They proceeded toward the rows of chairs, carefully picking their way through the other people. Daniel caught Charlotte's eye and gestured at the room. How long have you been a part of this? I don't know. Amelia started coming first. I don't remember how she found it. But as soon as she told me what it was about, I wanted to come for myself. That was, maybe 6 months ago? Abigail smiled. Way before my time. It's been only 5 weeks for me. Marcus put his arm around her waist. That's 5 weeks more than me. Daniel eyed Charlotte inquisitively. You're the veteran among us, so fill us in. What's it all about? Well, what the name says, a better way. She beamed, and he laughed. I gathered as much, but a better way than what precisely? Well, everything. Though what they talk about most is corporate and political power. A hot topic these days. Everyone works for the government or a nationwide corporation. Exactly, but it hasn't always been like that. Daniel felt the teacher in him begin to come out. That's true. The last few decades have seen a lot of centralization. Abigail motioned to him. Daniel teaches at a middle school. Charlotte raised her eyebrows. Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. And yes, the slow creep of corporate capitalism to push out smaller businesses in our country is a well-documented phenomenon. It's something I teach the kids about. Ever since Graves. Even before that, really. It turns out some things persist even as governments come and go. So, what does a better way think we should change? Charlotte started reciting what sounded like a well-worn list. Land ownership, food equality, gender equality, end monopolies, unions, individual empowerment, better government. Daniel bobbed his head. These were all the talking points he expected, and he didn't disagree. But it was simple rhetoric designed to attract and ensnare people into a better way's deeper agenda. He crossed his arms. Not everything is terrible, of course. Pollution isn't the concern it was in the previous century, thanks to solar and nuclear power, and we are far from the days of the great states in terms of mistreating minorities. Thank goodness for that, Charlotte shuddered. Abigail interjected. But that's the thing. A better way recognizes the progress we've made. They just think there's more work to do. Daniel didn't disagree. I'm all for it. I'd love to see a roadmap for how they intend to get there. He silently added that the roadmap he actually wanted was the one containing a better way's more covert operations and goals. As if on cue, the lights dimmed, signaling the speaker would be starting soon. They took their seats in the second row, Abigail in between Charlotte and Marcus, and Daniel out along the center aisle next to his friend. The podium lit up, and a woman dressed in a red suit and a matching crimson data lens approached it. The name Catherine Parker displayed across her body. She had long, dirty blonde hair styled into a small bouffant and enough makeup that he could make it out even from a distance. When she spoke, her voice projected charisma and charm. A better way chose well when they gave her this job. Food. An image appeared in the corner of Daniel's data lens, a roasted chicken surrounded by vegetables. We have access to so much, but at the same time, so little. The paradox of our day. What we can dream, we can eat, and yet it's slowly killing us. She stepped to the side of the podium and began pacing. Perhaps you think my statement is too strong? Maybe. But what does science tell us? The image switched to a vat of sludge-like liquid, the synthetic stuff their meals were made from. Daniel had a tank of it at home, refilled on a schedule by a service. If you believe the media, this is scientifically proven to be as healthy as real food. But is that accurate? Who are these scientists? Who do they work for? Images of a dozen corporate logos flashed before Daniel's eyes, capped at the end by the single star and two stripes of the United States flag. They don't work for us. A picture of a sandy-haired scientist in a white lab coat replaced the flag. This is Dr. Ingrid Tanberg, Ph.D. Her team performed randomized control trials of sludge versus real food, and the health outcomes for those on a steady diet of real food are better by 38%. Daniel noted the rhetoric of the word sludge. It was slick, but showed her bias. Words like this were chosen for emotional appeal. Also, he wanted to look at these studies. He had little doubt that elites had healthier lifestyles, but they had countless opportunities others didn't. Eating non-synthetic diets wasn't their only advantage, and probably not their most important one. Parker continued. Dr. Tanberg is not the only source. Study after study shows the same thing. I'll make all of my references available so you can research for yourselves. This is what the government and food production companies don't want you to know, because if they admitted to it, they'd have to also admit they don't have a solution. Parker's voice increased in intensity as she switched to a yellowing photo of cracked, dry land. The reason they don't have a solution is because of this. The majority of our country's topsoil is gone, eroded by exploitive agricultural practices, overloading the land, pumping it full of chemicals, never giving it time to recover. Corporations did this for over a century, allowing the topsoil to erode until almost all of it is gone. Do you realize the grass in our cities isn't real? It couldn't be, because we don't have the means to keep it growing. It's all a very clever ruse. Maybe 5% of the land in our country has topsoil now. How long does it take topsoil to form again after it has eroded away? 1,000 years. If synthetics hadn't been developed, we'd have faced a worldwide famine decades ago. It was grace upon us that synthetics came, and just in time. They saved us from so much starvation. Even if they aren't real, and even if they're unhealthy, they prevented the worst outcome. But they were meant to be an emergency measure, not a new way of life. But the agricultural companies didn't care about any of that. They saw a shiny bauble and reached for it, leaving behind the broken land. To them, synthetics meant increased profits. Sludge is easy and cheap to create, and if it makes us sick, that's irrelevant. They farm the limited topsoil we still have for the rich and powerful, while the rest of us eat fake food. She stopped her pacing, now back at the podium, and put her hands on either side of it, her gaze sweeping out over the audience. The image clicked off, and everyone in the room focused on her. Let me be clear. We aren't calling for panic. We're calling for solutions. That's in our name. A better way. This is a worldwide issue, and we want our nation to participate in the global conversation, engaging the facts with honesty and integrity. We can't drop the sludge right away. Maybe we'll never fully be rid of it, but we can lessen our dependence. The key is identifying a way to create topsoil so we can grow real food again. This may sound impossible, but it's not. Daniel's eyes widened. He'd read the argument she was about to make, and it was dangerous. He leaned over to Marcus, speaking in a whisper. This is about the failsafe. That's what she's talking about. Marcus glanced at him, confused, but Daniel motioned back toward her with his eyes. Listen. The United States has one export that so far the rest of the world does not. Matter manipulation devices. She held up a pocket unit to emphasize her point. They are used in all modern nations, but only manufactured here. We control this technology and its potential to create topsoil. Doing so would alleviate the natural food shortage that forces synthetics upon us. Marcus's forehead creased as he caught on. You all have heard about the so-called Failsafe. Future is now incorporated ensures it's a word everyone knows. They magnanimously limit MMDs in the name of preventing harm. But harm is not the only thing the Failsafe prevents. It prevents the creation of something we desperately need. Daniel's data lens now showed an image of brown dirt, the dark color a stark contrast to the previous yellows and grays. Parker referenced the picture. You might think this is lifeless, but it's not. Topsoil is full of many elements, some of them alive. Without life, you cannot grow life. It's a universal truth. We cannot start with inanimate matter and create something in which plants will grow. The depicted topsoil faded into a pile of discarded trash, an apple peel resting prominently on top. For an MMD to do what we need, it requires decaying animals, the remains of real food. It needs microorganisms. It needs life. So long as a failsafe is placed on every matter manipulation device, we can't use them to make topsoil. We're stuck with dead land that grows nothing. The image switched to a lush field with grazing cattle and stalks of wheat in the distance. We can do this. We know how. What stops us? Our own government. We could create topsoil across our nation, across the globe in fact, but only if we have the courage to remove the failsafe. As long as we persist in our current course, we have no choice but to wait for 1,000 years. MMDs could change the world tomorrow. The image vanished and Parker stepped to the side of the podium, now adopting a posture of appeal. If the idea of removing the failsafe alarms you, remember that it will happen someday. Feeney will not always control the ability to make these devices. Eventually, someone will figure out how to create MMDs without the failsafe, and yes, they will probably do it with villainous goals in mind. Our thought is, why should we wait? We have a way that could improve the health of our nation. Shouldn't we do it for the right reasons now? This is one of a better way's many objectives, but it's one that is close to my heart, and I hope it can be close to yours as well. All humans deserve to eat real food, and this is how we make that happen. The room broke into applause as the lights came up, and this disturbed Daniel more than the presentation. He thought about how Anna had described the sheep to him, manipulated and split open. Feeney had already accomplished what Parker suggested, and what's more, a better way knew it. A chill crept down his spine. She wasn't encouraging the technological innovation. She was trying to move public opinion to support the unthinkable.